Bye-bye, Bill, Sam says to his pony in Peter Jackson's film adaptation of The Fellowship of the Ring. Sam approached, his round face clouded with concern. "Goodbye, Bill," he said softly, patting the creature's neck. The equivalent passage in Ian Chesterfield's novelization, itself adapted from Jackson's film. The contrast between these two examples of the same moment provide a clear illustration of how different storytelling media function. In film, economy of language is not only common, but necessary. Dialogue must be quick, memorable, and paired with visual cues. The line, "Bye-bye, Bill," is strikingly short, only 2.5 words. The medium assumes that visuals, sound, and the actor's performance will fill in the emotional texture. In contrast, the novelization is entirely dependent on language to build the emotional tone and requires active participation from the imagination. The reader must picture Sam's face, feel the emotional texture of the words, and imagine the scene's mood. Thus, the novelization invites deeper internal engagement, while the film leverages external impact. To further explore these differences, this video will look at one part of the story in both the film and the novelization of The Fellowship of the Ring. First, we'll watch a short clip from the film. Then, we'll read the matching chapter from the novelization. Since films move quickly and can show a lot in just a few minutes, while novels often take pages to describe the same events, we'll break the novelization chapters into short passages. After each passage, we'll stop to talk about what works well in the novel, what might be stronger in the film, and how each version tells the story in its own way. We'll go back and forth like this until we've worked through the whole chapter. At the end, we'll wrap everything up by thinking about what each medium does best, where they might struggle, and how comparing them helps us understand the story in a new way. By the time we're finished, we'll have a much clearer idea of how storytelling changes when it moves from screen to page, and why that matters. Let's begin. The walls of Moria. Bloop, 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 bloop. Let's see. Ethildine. It mirrors only starlight and moonlight. It reads, "The doors of Durin, Lord of Moria. Speak, friend, and enter."
What do you suppose that means?
Oh, it's quite simple. If you are a friend, you speak the password and the doors will open. Anon ed Helen, ed Rohiamen. Prinsem Ixamba Shama, Yalano, Media by Edima. Alaste Catania, the Casamim. Mines are no place for a pony, even one so brave as Bill. Bye-bye, Bill. Go on, Bill. Don't worry, Sam. He knows the way home. Bloop. 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 Do not disturb the water. Oh, it's useless. It's a riddle.
Bloop, 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 bloop. Speak, friend, and enter. What's the Elvish word for friend? Bloop, bloop, bloop.
Melloch.
Ho, 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 ho. Soon, Master Elf, you will enjoy the fabled hospitality of the dwarfs. Roaring fires, malt beer, red meat off the bone. This, my friend, is the home of my cousin Balin, and they call it a mine. A mine! This is no mine. It's a tomb. Oh! 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 Goblins! Shing! We make for the Gap of Rohan. We should never have come here. Now, get out of here! Get out! Bloop, bloop, bloop. Ah, ah. Frodo! Frodo! Ah! Strider! Ah! Get off him! Strider! Aragorn! Ah! Bloop. Strider! Ah! Bloop, bloop. Bloop, bloop. Ah! Into the mines! Legolas! Run! We now have but one choice. We must face the long dark of Moria. Be on your guard. There are older and fouler things than orcs in the deep places of the world. Quietly now. It's a 4-day journey to the other side. Let us hope that our presence may go unnoticed.
Next, we'll read the first passage from the chapter of the novelization, and then compare and analyze the differences. Nightfall had descended by the time the Fellowship reached the western walls of Moria. They walked along the shore of a dark, still lake that mirrored the looming cliffs above. A destroyed stone footbridge jutted from the misty mountains ahead, and toward this ruin they trudged across a desolate grey landscape. Gimli, the dwarf, who had been silent for much of their journey since leaving the snow-covered slopes of Caradhras, suddenly halted. His eyes widened beneath his bushy brows as he gazed up at the shadowy cliff walls. "The walls of Moria," he breathed, his voice hushed with reverence. Ancient memories of his people stirred within him, stories passed down through generations of the splendor that once was. The narrow strip of land between mountain and lake offered treacherous footing. Slick, greasy stones threatened to send them sliding into the water at any misstep. Frodo suddenly slipped from the embankment, and his bare, hairy hobbit foot sank into the black lake water. Dead tree limbs reached from the water like desperate, grasping hands. They continued until they reached a smooth section of rock face beside a gnarled tree. Gandalf approached it with purpose, passing his hands over the seemingly featureless stone.
"It filled in,"
he murmured, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the rock.
"It mirrors only starlight and moonlight."
As if responding to his words, the clouds above parted. Moonlight spilled onto the cliff face, and where before there had only been stone, now faint lines appeared, slender veins of luminous silver running through the rock. The markings grew broader and clearer with each passing moment, forming a glowing, shimmering archway of interlacing letters and ancient symbols. 7 stars, 2 trees, and crescent moons adorned what was now clearly a doorway. Gandalf's weathered face lit up with satisfaction as he pointed to the newly glowing inscription written across the arch.
"It reads, 'The door of Durin, Lord of Moria. Speak, friend, and enter.'"
Merry peered at the glowing writing with curiosity. "What do you suppose that means exactly?"
"The meaning is straightforward,"
Gandalf replied, confidence evident in his tone.
"If you count yourself among friends, you need only speak the password, and the doors will grant you passage."
With that explanation, Gandalf stepped forward, raising his arms toward the shimmering doorway, and spoke in a commanding voice.
"Einon ed Helen, edro Hyamen."
The wind whistled through the rocky corridor, chilling Frodo to the bone. The hobbit wrapped his cloak tighter around his shoulders, but the cold seemed to emanate from within as much as without. Gandalf waited, but the great doors remained stubbornly closed. Undaunted, he pressed his staff against the stone, then pushed with his hands. The doors would not yield an inch. Gimli watched with increasing skepticism as the wizard frowned, then threw his full weight against the unyielding rock. The dwarf exchanged glances with the others as Gandalf's frustration grew evident. Time passed, and Gandalf continued to mutter incantations, while the rest of the fellowship settled by the enormous dark lake to wait. Sam busied himself with rearranging his cooking equipment, pots and pans that clinked softly as he took them off Bill. Aragorn removed the saddle and packs from their faithful pony.
"The mines are no place for a pony,"
Aragorn said gently as he stroked Bill's muzzle.
"Even one with your courage."
Sam approached, his round face clouded with concern. "Goodbye, Bill," he said softly, patting the creature's neck.
"Don't worry, Sam,"
Aragorn reassured him.
"He knows the path home."
With a light slap on the rump, Aragorn sent Bill trotting back the way they had come. Sam watched the pony disappear into the darkness, his heart heavy with yet another farewell. "Goodbye," he whispered again, too softly for anyone but himself to hear. This opening passage from the novelization offers a rich example of the strengths and limitations of prose as a storytelling medium, especially when contrasted with the same scene in the film. One of the foremost strengths lies in the interior access it grants. The prose doesn't just describe what happens, it offers insights into what the characters feel, even when they say nothing. Gimli's reverent pause before the walls of Moria, for instance, is not just an image, but a moment layered with unspoken cultural memory and inherited pride. The text invites the reader to imagine the ancient stories stirring within him, a depth of experience that the film could only imply. Similarly, Sam's whispered farewell to Bill the pony resonates more poignantly here than it could in the visual medium, because the narration draws our attention to his emotional state rather than just showing him standing quietly. Another strength of prose is its ability to slow down time. The glowing emergence of the doors of Durin is depicted with an almost ritualistic slowness, sentence by sentence, allowing the sense of wonder and tension to unfold gradually. In the film, this transformation was over in a few seconds, and was potentially more dramatic and spectacular, but not necessarily more meaningful. The prose allows the moonlight's arrival and the appearance of ancient runes to build atmosphere and anticipation with quiet reverence. That control over pacing, modulated by syntax and structure rather than editing, is one of prose's quiet superpowers. However, prose also reveals its limitations in a scene like this, where physical scale and visual drama are important. While the novel does a fine job describing the moonlight on the rock and the transformation of the doors, it's inherently an abstraction. The glowing runes must be imagined rather than seen. The film immediately conveyed the grandeur of the gateway, the size of the cliffs, the black sheen of the lake, and the eerie reach of tree limbs from the water, all with an immediacy that prose can only approximate through metaphor and imagery. In this way, prose asks more of the reader's imagination, and may risk losing some of the visual spectacle, especially for those who are not already attuned to conjuring vivid mental pictures from description. Let's continue. A sudden splash drew their attention to the lake. Merry and Pippin had taken to tossing stones into the still water, watching as black rippling rings fanned out across its surface. As Pippin prepared to throw another stone, Aragorn's hand shot out and gripped the young hobbit's wrist. "Leave the water undisturbed," he warned, his voice low and ominous. The ranger's eyes remained fixed on the lake, where the ripples seemed to grow beyond what the small stone should have caused. Bubbles broke the surface some distance out, and Aragorn exchanged a concerned glance with Boromir. His hand moved instinctively toward the hilt of his sword. Meanwhile, Gandalf had given up at his attempts in frustration. He tossed his staff aside and slumped onto a rock next to Frodo, removing his pointed hat with a sigh. Frodo, who had been studying the doorway during this time, suddenly stood. He approached the elvish inscription, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then his face brightened with comprehension. "It's a riddle," he said quietly. Gandalf looked up, his bushy eyebrows rising in question. In the lake, something moved beneath the surface, disturbing the water once more. "Speak, friend, and enter," Frodo recited. "What's the Elvish word for friend?" A spark of realization lit Gandalf's eyes.
Melon.
With that single word, the rock face began to divide silently in the middle. Two massive stone slabs swung outward, revealing a blackness deeper than the night itself. Gandalf rose to his feet with renewed vigor. He placed a crystal in the clawed top of his staff, which began to emit a soft glow, and strode forward into the dark mine. The Fellowship followed cautiously, with Mary casting an uneasy glance back at the disturbed waters of the lake. As they ventured into the darkness, something beneath the surface of the lake stirred. Inside the entrance to Moria, the Fellowship found themselves in a dank cavern with winding steps leading deeper into the mountain. The air was stale and heavy with dust, untouched by fresh breezes, for what felt like an eternity.
"Soon,"
Gimli proclaimed with pride to Legolas,
"you will experience the legendary hospitality of the dwarves. Roaring hearths, rich malt beer, succulent meat fresh from the bone."
His chest swelled with pride.
"This is the domain of my cousin Balin, and they call this a mine,"
he added with a derisive snort.
"A mine!"
The light from Gandalf's staff suddenly grew brighter, illuminating the entry chamber, and with it, a scene of horror that drew gasps from the entire company. This continuation of the Moria sequence further underscores the unique capacities of prose in building tension and deepening character, while also hinting again at where film might more efficiently or more viscerally convey certain moments. The passage makes strong use of atmospheric pacing and delayed revelation, a technique especially well suited to the written form, where language can stretch out a moment, draw focus to minor details, and create unease, not through what is seen, but what is implied. A major strength here is the way the prose uses juxtaposition to cultivate suspense. The almost playful irreverence of Merry and Pippin tossing stones into the lake contrasts with Aragorn's sudden wordless fear. The shift in tone happens in a breath, from idle hobbit amusement to a growing silent dread. This tonal swing is handled deftly, with Aragorn's reaction conveying more than exposition ever could. The film showed Aragorn's face tighten and his hand hold Pippin mid-throw, but the prose allows us to enter his awareness directly, to feel his eyes tracking the unnatural growth of the ripples, the tension rising like a string being pulled taut. That said, prose reveals its limitations again when it comes to immediacy and visceral reaction. The final lines hint at a horrific discovery, a gasp-worthy scene in the entryway, but the shock lands less sharply than it did in the visual medium. The film was able to frame the chamber reveal with sudden illumination, jump cuts, and close-ups of aghast faces. But here, the horror is implied, rather than shown, relying on the reader's imagination to complete the picture. This can be powerful in its own right, but for some readers, it lacks the immediate jolt that cinema can provide with sound and image. Let's continue. Scattered throughout the chamber were dwarf skeletons and decomposed corpses, frozen in the throes of violent death. The ground was littered with the remains of what had clearly been a brutal battle. Rusting armor and shields pierced with arrows, skulls cracked open, contorted bodies whose final moments had been ones of agony. "This is no mine," Boromir said grimly, his voice echoing in the chamber of death. It's a tomb. Gimli's previous enthusiasm shattered into pieces. He rushed forward to examine one of the fallen, his voice rising in a wail of anguish. No! 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 Legolas knelt and pulled a crude arrow from one of the skeletons, examining its primitive craftsmanship. Goblins! He hissed, immediately reaching for his bow. The Fellowship drew their weapons instinctively, backing away toward the entrance. We make for the Gap of Rohan, Boromir declared, his sword gleaming in the dim light. We should never have come here. As the hobbits retreated back toward the doorway, a sudden commotion erupted from the lake outside. A massive tentacle shot from the water, wrapping itself around Frodo's ankle and yanking him to the ground. Strider! Sam cried, drawing his small sword. Frodo's scream pierced the night as the slimy appendage dragged him toward the lake. Aragorn and Boromir rushed forward, blades flashing. With a precise stroke, Aragorn severed the tentacle holding Frodo, while Boromir hacked at other writhing limbs that had begun to emerge from the water. Merry and Pippin pulled Frodo toward the doorway, but their moment of relief was short-lived. The surface of the lake exploded as dozens more tentacles rippled out, attached to a monstrous creature rising from the depths. Like some nightmarish octopus, it lashed out at the Fellowship with renewed fury. Once again, the beast seized Frodo, lifting him high into the air as the others battled desperately below. "Into the mines!" Gandalf shouted above the chaos. Boromir looked to the elf for aid. "Legolas!" With fluid precision, Legolas loosed an arrow that struck the creature's head, while Aragorn and Boromir waded into the water, slashing at the slippery appendages that threatened to overwhelm them. A grotesque Cthulhu-like face emerged from beneath the water, its bulging eyes fixed on Frodo as it opened jaws lined with jagged teeth. Boromir hacked off a tentacle with a vicious blow, while Aragorn severed another. With a precise cut, Aragorn freed Frodo once again from the tentacle holding him aloft. Frodo tumbled through the air and landed in Boromir's waiting arms. Together, they all raced from the water toward the mine entrance, with the rest of the Fellowship in close pursuit. The creature, enraged by the loss of its prey, surged forward onto the shore. Its massive tentacles seized the ancient doors, pulling and thrashing with incredible strength. Legolas fired arrows into its eyes as the Fellowship retreated deeper into the mine. With a deafening crash, the creature tore at the doorway, bringing down tons of rock from above. Boulders tumbled down the cliff face, sealing the entrance in seconds. The Fellowship could only watch in horror as their exit disappeared beneath the avalanche, leaving them stranded in pitch darkness. After a moment of breathless silence, a faint light rose from Gandalf's staff, casting an eerie glow across the wizard's solemn face. He looked at the blocked passage, then turned to face the dark depths of Moria. "We now have but one choice," he said, his voice heavy with foreboding. "We must face the long dark of Moria." The light from his staff grew slightly stronger as he surveyed the anxious faces around him. "Be on your guard. There are older and fouler things than orcs in the deep places of the world." The Fellowship moved deeper into the mine, following the path illuminated by Gandalf's staff. "Move quietly now," Gandalf cautioned as they proceeded. "It's a 4-day journey to the other side.
Let us hope our presence goes unnoticed.
The words hung in the stale air as they ventured into the unknown darkness, each step taking them further from the light of the world above. This climactic segment highlights the high-stakes transition from suspense to action, and in doing so, it brings the strengths and weaknesses of prose into sharp relief. The monster reveal, for example, is handled very differently by the prose than the film. The film showed the creature in a visual crescendo, tentacles thrashing, water exploding, a grotesque head rising. But the novelization leans on metaphor and literary allusion. Quote, a grotesque Cthulhu-like face. End quote. This works in two ways. It invokes the reader's cultural imagination, allowing horror to bloom in the mind, rather than rely on special effects. And it avoids over-describing the creature, maintaining a sense of primal dread. While the film risked desensitizing the audience with an overexposed monster, the prose keeps its horror potent by withholding detail and relying on suggestion. However, the passage does show prose straining under the demands of combat choreography. While it conveys key beats, a tentacle seizing Frodo, Aragorn and Boromir cutting him loose, the creature attacking again, the spatial relationships between characters and actions are sometimes hard to track. In the film, the geography was immediately clear. Who's where? What the creature looks like in full? How close the danger really is. But in prose, without precise blocking or visual anchors, some of that spatial tension is lost or left to the reader's construction. This is where film, with its camera movements and visual continuity, tends to excel. And in the closing moments, the writing returns to quiet, again drawing out contrast. The noise of battle gives way to the heavy silence of entombment, and Gandalf's warning, quote, "There are older and fouler things than orcs," end quote, is more than foreshadowing. It's a tonal pivot. The characters have crossed a threshold, not just physically, but narratively. From quest into horror, from wonder into dread. Prose lets that dread linger, not just as an external threat, but as something internalized. The final lines, quote, "Each step taking them further from the light of the world above," end quote, isn't just scene setting. It's a poetic summary of what the Fellowship has just lost, and what they must now endure. Ultimately, this chapter proves again that prose has an ability to delve deeper than surface spectacle. It can make time stretch, emotions swell, and silence ring with meaning. But in fast, spatially complex sequences like this, it asks more of the reader to assemble the action in their mind. Thank you for watching this comparative analysis. Next time, we'll be comparing the scene where the Fellowship delved deeper into the mines of Moria with the corresponding chapter in the novelization and analyzing the differences. Take care, and if you're listening to this, please send help.